Nature speaks in mysterious ways, but only to those who are willing to pause long enough to listen. For Dr. Amelia Harrison, a wildlife veterinarian who had dedicated her life to saving injured animals across 3 continents, the language of the wild was one she spoke fluently, until that fateful spring morning on Route 16, when a mother bear taught her that some lessons can't be learned in any medical textbook. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rising sun painted the mountainside in hues of amber and gold as Amelia's truck hummed along the winding road cutting through Blackridge National Forest. After 3 years serving as the head veterinarian at the region's wildlife rehabilitation center, these early morning drives had become a meditation of sorts, a peaceful transition between her cabin near Silver Lake and the organized chaos awaiting her at the center. Spring in Blackridge meant new beginnings, but it also meant increased wildlife activity. The center's intake had nearly doubled in the past 2 weeks as hibernating creatures awakened to a world of both natural dangers and human-made hazards. Just yesterday, they'd admitted 3 orphaned fox kits, a great horned owl with a broken wing, and a young deer with a leg caught in abandoned fishing wire. Every case different, every patient special, but all part of the rhythmic cycle Amelia had grown accustomed to. Today, though, would break that rhythm in ways she could never have anticipated. The first indication that something was different came when her radio crackled to life. All units be advised, we have reports of a bear on Route 16, approximately 3 miles east of Pinecrest Overlook. Animal control has been notified. Proceed with caution. Amelia instinctively eased her foot off the accelerator. Bear sightings weren't uncommon in Blackridge, especially during spring, when food sources were still limited and mothers with new cubs ventured closer to human areas in search of nourishment. Most encounters ended peacefully, with the bears retreating back into the forest once they'd satisfied their curiosity or hunger. But a bear directly on the highway, that was concerning. Vehicle collisions were among the leading causes of wildlife deaths in the region, and the thought of a potential tragedy made Amelia's stomach tighten. She reached for her phone, quickly dialing the center. "Morning, Marcus," she said when her assistant director answered. "Did you hear the report about the bear on Route 16? "Just got the alert," Marcus replied, his voice tinged with concern. "That's right on your route, isn't it?" "About a mile ahead, I think. I'm going to slow down, see if I can assess the situation before animal control arrives. If it's injured, we might need to prepare—" "Amelia," Marcus interrupted, his tone stern but caring, "just observe. Don't approach. Animal control should be there in 15 minutes. Promise me." She smiled despite herself. Marcus knew her too well, knew her instinct to intervene, to help, even at personal risk. "Promise, I'll just get a visual and call it in. Nothing heroic." As she hung up, Amelia reduced her speed further, her eyes scanning the road ahead with heightened attention. The forest pressed close on both sides, ancient pines and oaks creating walls of green that occasionally broke to reveal glimpses of the morning sky. The road curved sharply to the right, and as she navigated the bend, she saw it. A line of 3 vehicles stopped in the middle of the highway. Hazard lights blinked in unison, creating an amber warning that reflected off the dewy asphalt. A middle-aged man in a flannel shirt stood beside a pickup truck, waving his arms to signal approaching drivers to slow down. Behind him, A young couple remained in their sedan, faces illuminated by the blue glow of a phone as they presumably called for assistance. And at the front of the impromptu traffic stop, an elderly woman had stepped halfway out of her SUV, her expression a mixture of concern and wonder. Amelia pulled to the shoulder, her veterinarian kit already in hand, before she'd fully processed the decision to stop. As she approached the small gathering, the reason for the roadblock became immediately clear. Standing directly in the center of Route 16, unmovable and unrushed, was one of the largest black bears Amelia had ever seen in the region. Female, definitely. Her size and features made that apparent even from a distance. The bear's dark fur gleamed in the morning light, highlighting a muscular frame that commanded both respect and caution. But it wasn't the bear's size that made Amelia's breath catch in her throat. It was her behavior. The animal wasn't foraging along the roadside, or wandering confusedly across the pavement, as bears typically did when they found themselves near human infrastructure. This bear was deliberately positioned across both lanes, her stance wide and intentional, effectively blocking passage in either direction. "She's been there for nearly 20 minutes, the elderly woman informed Amelia as she approached. "Hasn't moved an inch. Animal control's coming, but I'm worried someone's going to try to drive around her." "Has she shown any signs of aggression?" Amelia asked, her professional assessment already underway. "None," replied the man in flannel, who introduced himself as Ray, a local logger. "That's what's so strange. She's not agitated, not pacing, just standing there, watching." Amelia nodded, her mind cycling through possible explanations. Early spring, female bear, unusual behavior. The most likely scenario was protection of cubs. She carefully scanned the roadside, looking for tiny, furry bodies that might explain the mother's vigilant stance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nothing. "I'm a wildlife veterinarian with the Rehabilitation Center," she explained to the small group that had now clustered at a respectful distance from the road. "I'd like to observe her for a few minutes before animal control arrives, if that's all right. There might be cubs nearby that she's protecting." The others nodded, and Amelia took a few careful steps closer, still maintaining a safe distance of about 50 yards. She reached for the binoculars she kept in her kit, focusing them on the bear. What she saw made her professional composure falter. The bear was watching her, not in the general way wild animals observed potential threats, but with a direct, unwavering gaze that seemed to lock onto Amelia specifically. Even as other cars slowly joined the growing queue of vehicles, the bear's attention remained fixed on her. "That's unusual," Amelia muttered to herself. Through the binoculars, she could now make out more details. The bear's coat, while generally healthy, showed several patches where the fur was thin or missing entirely, possible signs of mange or a past injury. There was also something unusual about her movement. Though the bear remained stationary in her blockade position, her weight shifted subtly, favoring her right side. An injury? Illness? Something that might explain this atypical behavior? Amelia lowered the binoculars, her mind working through the possibilities. If the bear was injured, approaching would be particularly dangerous. Wounded animals were unpredictable, their pain overriding normal, cautious instincts around humans. But if she was seriously hurt and animal control wasn't equipped for medical intervention, The internal debate was interrupted when the bear suddenly made a sound. Not the threatening growl Amelia might have expected, but a low, almost mournful moan that carried across the pavement to the assembled humans. The sound raised the hair on the back of Amelia's neck. In 15 years of wildlife medicine, she'd heard bears vocalize in dozens of ways, but never quite like this. Then, still maintaining eye contact with Amelia, the bear took one deliberate step backward, then another, then stopped. "She's moving," Ray called out, a note of relief in his voice. Maybe she's finally heading back to the woods. But Amelia knew better. This wasn't retreat. It was invitation. The bear moaned again, louder this time, and took a third backward step before once more becoming still, her gaze never leaving Amelia. "Oh, my God," whispered the young woman from the sedan, who had finally ventured out of her car. Is she trying to get you to follow her?" The question hung in the air, giving voice to the impossible thought that had already formed in Amelia's mind. The logical, scientific part of her immediately rejected the notion. Bears didn't beckon humans. They didn't communicate with sustained eye contact. They didn't strategically block roads as a means of seeking assistance. And yet, 15 years in wildlife medicine had taught Amelia one crucial lesson. Animals, especially the intelligent ones like bears, could sometimes display behaviors that defied conventional understanding. She'd seen injured wolves lead rangers to their trapped packmates. She'd watched elephants mourn their dead with ceremonies that looked eerily like human rituals. She'd witnessed orangutans using complex tools to solve problems that would challenge many humans. What if this bear was trying to communicate? The crackle of a radio interrupted her thoughts as a county sheriff's vehicle pulled up behind the growing line of cars. Deputy Liam Chen stepped out, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to recognition when he spotted Amelia. "Dr. Harrison," he called, approaching with the confident stride of someone accustomed to taking control of unusual situations. "Fancy meeting you here. Animal control's about 10 minutes out. What's your assessment?" Amelia and Liam had worked together on several wildlife cases over the past few years, everything from illegal hunting operations to rescued exotic pets. She trusted his judgment, and more importantly, he respected her expertise. Female black bear, approximately 250–300 pounds, showing unusual behavior but no signs of aggression, she reported, falling easily into professional shorthand. Possible injury on her right side. She's deliberately blocking the road, and I think— Amelia hesitated, aware of how her next words would sound. "I think she might be trying to get our attention for a specific reason." To his credit, Liam didn't immediately dismiss her theory. He'd seen enough of Amelia's uncanny ability to read animal behavior to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Attention for what?" he asked, hand resting cautiously on his tranquilizer gun. "Standard equipment. For wildlife calls in Blackridge County." "I don't know yet," Amelia admitted, "but she's showing signs of wanting us, or at least me, to follow her." As if on cue, the bear moaned again and took another backward step, still maintaining that unsettling eye contact. Liam whistled low. "I've been responding to wildlife calls for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like this." "Me neither," Amelia confessed. The deputy was quiet for a moment, weighing options and protocols. "Animal control will want to tranquilize her," he finally said. "Standard procedure for a bear this close to the highway. They'll relocate her, deeper into the national forest. The words sent an inexplicable surge of alarm through Amelia. "We need to wait," she said, surprising herself with the urgency in her voice. "Something's not right here. This isn't normal bear behavior, even for a mother with cubs nearby." Liam studied her face, then the bear, then the growing line of vehicles. "I can give you 5 minutes," he decided. "Then I need to clear this road." 5 minutes. Amelia took a deep breath, her mind racing. What was she missing? What was the bear trying to communicate? She raised the binoculars again, focusing on the animal's face. The bear's eyes were alert, intelligent, but now that she looked more carefully, Amelia could see something else there, an emotion that, if observed in a human or domestic animal, she would have immediately identified as distress. Then her gaze traveled down to the bear's chest, where something caught her attention. A small, irregular patch of fur that looked slick, darker than the surrounding coat. She adjusted the focus, trying to get a clearer view. "Liam," she said quietly, "I think she's injured. There's blood on her chest, but it doesn't look like a fresh wound." The deputy frowned. "If she's wounded, that makes her more dangerous, not less. All the more reason to let animal control handle this." But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. "The blood pattern is strange," she continued, still studying the bear through her binoculars. "It's not consistent with a hunting injury or a fight with another animal. It almost looks like—" She trailed off, the impossible thought taking shape. "Like what?" Liam prompted. "Like it's not her blood." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Before Liam could respond, the bear moaned again, louder, more insistent, and took several more backward steps toward the forest edge. This time, the message was unmistakable. Amelia made a decision that went against every safety protocol she'd learned in her career. "I'm going to follow her." "Absolutely not," Liam protested, exactly as she'd expected. "That's a wild bear, possibly injured, definitely acting abnormally. I can't let you put yourself at risk like that." "I'll keep a safe distance," Amelia assured him, already reaching into her kit for her tranquilizer pen, a last resort if things went wrong. "But Liam, I've worked with wild animals for 15 years. This bear isn't displaying predatory behavior. She's displaying help-seeking behavior. I've seen it before in more intelligent species." "Bears don't ask for help from humans," Liam argued, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of his own words. "Generally, no," Amelia agreed, "but exceptional circumstances can produce exceptional behaviors." She nodded toward the bear, who was now standing at the forest edge, still watching them intently. "And everything about this situation is exceptional." Liam ran a hand through his hair, conflict evident on his face. Finally, he unclipped his radio. "I'm coming with you," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. "And we stay at least 30 yards back at all times." Relief washed through Amelia. "Agreed." She turned to address the small crowd that had gathered. "Please, stay with your vehicles," she instructed. "Deputy Chen and I are going to investigate something in the woods. If animal control arrives before we return, please ask them to wait." The onlookers nodded, their faces a mixture of confusion, concern, and curiosity. Amelia couldn't blame them. She could scarcely believe what she was doing herself. As she and Liam carefully approached the forest edge, the bear watched their advance with what Amelia could only describe as impatience. When they reached the tree line, the animal finally turned and began moving into the woods, pausing every few steps to ensure they were following. "This is surreal," Liam muttered, keeping pace beside Amelia as they maintained their promised distance. "In all my years on the force, I've never followed a bear into the woods voluntarily." "First time for everything," Amelia replied, her attention fixed on the animal ahead of them. The bear moved with purpose, following what appeared to be a game trail that wound between towering pines and flowering dogwoods. Despite her size, she navigated the underbrush with surprising grace, though Amelia noted again that slight favoring of her right side. They walked for nearly 10 minutes, the sounds of the highway fading behind them. The forest was alive with morning activity, birdsong from the canopy, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the gentle sway of branches in the spring breeze. Under different circumstances, it would have been a peaceful hike. Then, without warning, the bear stopped. They had reached a small clearing, where a massive fallen oak created a natural bridge across a shallow ravine. The bear turned to face them, made that same mournful sound, then disappeared over the edge of the ravine. Amelia and Liam exchanged glances. "I don't like this," the deputy said, hand moving to his weapon. "We can't see where she went." "Let's approach carefully," Amelia suggested, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "Stay behind me." They edged forward slowly until they could peer over the ravine's lip. What they saw below made them both freeze in shock. In a small, sheltered hollow beneath the fallen oak tree was a makeshift den. Not unusual for a black bear with cubs, but what lay inside that den was far from usual. The mother bear stood protectively over two small forms. One was her cub, as Amelia had suspected. Tiny, fluffy, and clearly very young, probably born during the winter hibernation. But the other form wasn't a bear at all. It was a child. A small human child, no older than 3 or 4, lay curled against the bear cub, wrapped in what appeared to be the remnants of a red jacket. Even from this distance, Amelia could see the child was unnaturally still. "Oh my God," she whispered, her professional detachment momentarily shattered by the sight. "Liam!" The deputy was already reaching for his radio, his face pale with shock. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Chen. We need immediate medical assistance at—" He paused, realizing the problem. "Stand by for coordinates. We have a child. Repeat, a human child found in the forest, condition unknown." While Liam called for backup, Amelia's mind was already shifting into emergency medical mode. Without conscious thought, she began moving down the ravine's gentle slope toward the den. The mother bear watched her approach, making no threatening moves, though her body remained positioned between Amelia and the two small forms. "It's okay," Amelia found herself saying, knowing the bear couldn't understand the words, but hoping her calm tone would communicate her intentions. "I'm here to help. You did the right thing. You did so well." To her astonishment, as she drew closer, the bear slowly shifted to the side, creating a path to the child while still remaining close enough to protect her cub. Amelia knelt beside the small form, her trained hands already checking for a pulse, for breathing, for any signs of life. The child, a little boy with dark hair, was pale and cold to the touch, but to her immense relief, she found a pulse, weak but present. "He's alive," she called up to Liam, who was now making his way down the slope, still coordinating with dispatch. Severely hypothermic, probably dehydrated, but alive. As Amelia began emergency treatment, using thermal blankets, from her kit to warm the child, her mind raced with questions. How had this boy ended up in the forest? How long had he been missing? And most incredibly, had the mother bear actually been caring for him alongside her own cub? The evidence before her eyes suggested the impossible, yet what other explanation could there be? The child's position, curled against the bear cub for warmth. The lack of any visible injuries that would indicate an attack. The blood on the mother. Bear's chest that wasn't her own. Had she carried him here? "Paramedics are on their way," Liam reported, kneeling beside her. "They'll bring a stretcher down from the road. Search and rescue is also mobilizing. There's been no report of a missing child in the county, but they're checking neighboring jurisdictions now." He paused, his gaze moving from the child to the bear, who remained vigilant but non-threatening just a few feet away. I don't even have words for what this is. "She saved him," Amelia said softly, the truth of it settling over her with absolute certainty. Somehow this bear found a lost child in the forest, and instead of following her instincts as a predator, she followed her instincts as a mother, Liam finished, awe evident in his voice. As they waited for the medical team, Amelia continued, to monitor the child's vital signs, which were slowly improving with the emergency treatment. The mother bear remained nearby, occasionally checking on her own cub, but never taking her eyes off the humans for long. "She brought him to her den," Amelia said, piecing together what must have happened. "Kept him warm through the night with her own body heat and that of her cub. And when that wasn't enough, when she realized he needed more help than she could provide, she went to the road," Liam continued, understanding dawning on his face. "Deliberately blocked traffic until someone who could help arrived, and then, somehow, impossibly, recognized you as that help." Amelia glanced at the bear, who was watching her with those same intelligent, knowing eyes. "They're much smarter than we give them credit for," she said quietly. "Much more aware, much more connected to us than we realize." The sound of voices calling from above signaled the arrival of the medical team. As the paramedics carefully made their way down the ravine with a stretcher, something remarkable happened. The mother bear, sensing the arrival of strangers, gently nudged her cub deeper into the den for safety. But she herself remained visible, watchful, as if understanding that these new humans were also here to help. As the child was carefully transferred to the stretcher, his eyelids fluttered briefly, the first sign of returning consciousness. Amelia felt a surge of hope. Against all odds, this little boy had survived what should have been a fatal night in the wilderness, protected by the most unlikely guardian angel. Once the child was secured, the paramedics began the careful process of moving him up the ravine toward the ambulance waiting on the forest road. Amelia lingered for a moment, her gaze locked with the mother bear's. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the miracle she had witnessed, but all she had to offer. "I'll make sure he's safe now." As if understanding, the bear made a soft, rumbling sound, not a growl, but something gentler, before finally turning away to tend to her cub. Amelia climbed back up the ravine to where Liam waited. "What happens to her now?" she asked, suddenly protective of the bear, who had shown such extraordinary compassion. "That's largely up to you," Liam replied. "As the wildlife expert on scene, your recommendation will carry weight. Standard protocol would be relocation, but—" He trailed off, looking back toward the den. "This isn't a standard situation," Amelia finished for him. Already, her mind was formulating a plan. A protected area for the mother and cub, a period of observation, perhaps even a study that might help us better understand the complex emotional lives of these creatures we share the planet with. As they made their way back toward the road, where a crowd of emergency vehicles now gathered, Amelia felt changed in some fundamental way. The barrier she had always perceived between human and animal experience had been revealed as more permeable than she had ever imagined. A mother bear had recognized a human child in need and chosen protection over predation, had recognized a human adult who could help and found a way to communicate across the vast divide of species, had demonstrated a level of empathy and intelligence that defied conventional understanding. If that was possible, what else might be possible in the connection between humans and the natural world we so often hold ourselves apart from? It was a question that would shape Amelia's life and work in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But one thing she knew with certainty: she would never look at a wild creature the same way again. The crackle of a radio interrupted her thoughts as a county sheriff's vehicle pulled up behind the growing line of cars. Deputy Liam Chen stepped out, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to recognition when he spotted Amelia. "Dr. Harrison," he called, approaching with the confident stride of someone accustomed to taking control of unusual situations. "Fancy meeting you here. Animal control's about 10 minutes out. What's your assessment?" Amelia and Liam had worked together on several wildlife cases over the past few years, everything from illegal hunting operations to rescued exotic pets. She trusted his judgment, and more importantly, he respected her expertise. Female black, bear, approximately 250 to 300 pounds, showing unusual behavior but no signs of aggression, she reported, falling easily into professional shorthand. Possible injury on her right side. She's deliberately blocking the road, and I think— Amelia hesitated, aware of how her next words would sound. "I think she might be trying to get our attention for a specific reason." To his credit, Liam didn't immediately dismiss her theory. He'd seen enough of Amelia's uncanny ability to read animal behavior to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Attention for what?" he asked, hand resting cautiously on his tranquilizer gun. "Standard equipment. For wildlife calls in Blackridge County. We don't know yet," Amelia admitted. "But she's showing signs of wanting us, or at least me, to follow her." As if on cue, the bear moaned again and took another backward step, still maintaining that unsettling eye contact. Liam whistled low. "I've been responding to wildlife calls for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like this." "Me neither," Amelia confessed. The deputy was quiet for a moment, weighing options and protocols. "Animal control will want to tranquilize her," he finally said. "Standard procedure for a bear this close to the highway. They'll relocate her deeper into the national forest." The words sent an inexplicable surge of alarm through Amelia. "We need to wait," she said, surprising herself with the urgency in her voice. "Something's not right here. This isn't normal bear behavior, even for a mother with cubs nearby." Liam studied her face, then the bear, then the growing line of vehicles. "I can give you 5 minutes," he decided. "Then I need to clear this road." 5 minutes. Amelia took a deep breath, her mind racing. What was she missing? What was the bear trying to communicate? She raised the binoculars again, focusing on the animal's face. The bear's eyes were alert, intelligent, but now that she looked more carefully, Amelia could see something else there. An emotion that, if observed in a human or domestic animal, she would have immediately identified as distress. Then her gaze traveled down to the bear's chest, where something caught her attention. A small, irregular patch of fur that looked slick, darker than the surrounding coat. She adjusted the focus, trying to get a clearer view. "Liam," she said quietly, "I think she's injured. There's blood on her chest, but it doesn't look like a fresh wound." The deputy frowned. "If she's wounded, that makes her more dangerous, not less. All the more reason to let animal control handle this." But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. "The blood pattern is strange," she continued, still studying the bear through her binoculars. "It's not consistent with a hunting injury or a fight with another animal. It almost looks like—" She trailed off, the impossible thought taking shape. "Like what?" Liam prompted. "Like it's not her blood." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Before Liam could respond, the bear moaned again, louder, more insistent, and took several more backward steps toward the forest edge. This time the message was unmistakable. Amelia made a decision that went against every safety protocol she'd learned in her career. "I'm going to follow her." "Absolutely not," Liam protested, exactly as she'd expected. "That's a wild bear, possibly injured, definitely acting abnormally. I can't let you put yourself at risk like that." "I'll keep a safe distance," Amelia assured him, already reaching into her kit for her tranquilizer pen. A last resort if things went wrong. "But Liam, I've worked with wild animals for 15 years. This bear isn't displaying predatory behavior. She's displaying help-seeking behavior. I've seen it before in more intelligent species." "Bears don't ask for help from humans," Liam argued, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of his own words. "Generally, no," Amelia agreed, "but exceptional circumstances can produce exceptional behaviors." She nodded toward the bear, who was now standing at the forest edge, still watching them intently. "And everything about this situation is exceptional." Liam ran a hand through his hair, conflict evident on his face. Finally, he unclipped his radio. "I'm coming with you," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable, "and we stay at least 30 yards back at all times." Relief washed through Amelia. "Agreed." She turned to address the small crowd that had gathered. "Please, stay with your vehicles," she instructed. "Deputy Chen and I are going to investigate something in the woods. If animal control arrives before we return, please ask them to wait." The onlookers nodded, their faces a mixture of confusion, concern, and curiosity. Amelia couldn't blame them. She could scarcely believe what she was doing herself. As she and Liam carefully approached the forest edge, the bear watched there, advance with what Amelia could only describe as impatience. When they reached the tree line, the animal finally turned and began moving into the woods, pausing every few steps to ensure they were following. "This is surreal," Liam muttered, keeping pace beside Amelia as they maintained their promised distance. "In all my years on the force, I've never followed a bear into the woods voluntarily." "First time for everything," Amelia replied, her attention fixed on the animal ahead of them. The bear moved with purpose, following what appeared to be a game trail that wound between towering pines and flowering dogwoods. Despite her size, she navigated the underbrush with surprising grace, though Amelia noted again that slight favoring of her right side. They walked for nearly 10 minutes, the sounds of the highway fading behind them. The forest was alive with morning activity, bird song from the canopy, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the gentle sway of branches in the spring breeze. Under different circumstances, it would have been a peaceful hike. Then, without warning, the bear stopped. They had reached a small clearing where a massive fallen oak created a natural bridge across a shallow ravine. The bear turned to face them, made that same mournful sound, then disappeared over the edge of the ravine. Amelia and Liam exchanged glances. "I don't like this," the deputy said, hand moving to his weapon. "We can't see where she went." "Let's approach carefully," Amelia suggested, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "Stay behind me." They edged forward slowly until they could peer over the ravine's lip. What they saw below made them both freeze in shock. In a small, sheltered hollow beneath the fallen oak tree was a makeshift den. Not unusual for a black bear with cubs, but what lay inside that den was far from usual. The mother bear stood protectively over two small forms. One was her cub, as Amelia had suspected, tiny, fluffy, and clearly very young, probably born during the winter hibernation. But the other form wasn't a bear at all. It was a child, a small human child, no older than 3 or 4, lay curled against the bear cub, wrapped in what appeared to be the remnants of a red jacket. Even from this distance, Amelia could see the child was unnaturally still. "Oh, my God!" she whispered, her professional detachment momentarily shattered by the sight. "Liam!" The deputy was already reaching for his radio, his face pale with shock. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Chen. We need immediate medical assistance at—" He paused, realizing the problem. "Stand by for coordinates. We have a child, repeat, a human child found in the forest, condition unknown." While Liam called for backup, Amelia's mind was already shifting into emergency medical mode. Without conscious thought, she began moving down the ravine's gentle slope toward the den. The mother bear watched her approach, making no threatening moves, though her body remained positioned between Amelia and the two small forms. "It's okay," Amelia found herself saying, knowing the bear couldn't understand the words, but hoping her calm tone would communicate her intentions. "I'm here to help. You did the right thing. You did so well." To her astonishment, as she drew closer, the bear slowly shifted to the side, creating a path to the child while still remaining close enough to protect her cub. Amelia knelt beside the small form, her trained hands already checking for a pulse, for breathing, for any signs of life. The child, a little boy with dark hair, was pale and cold to the touch, but to her immense relief, she found a pulse, weak but present. "He's alive!" she called up to Liam, who was now making his way down the slope, still coordinating with dispatch. Severely hypothermic, probably dehydrated, but alive. As the paramedics arrived and carefully transported the child to safety, the mystery of how he had ended up in the bear's care began to unfold. Search and rescue teams, following Liam's coordinates, discovered evidence of a camping site about 2 miles deeper in the forest. A tent collapsed under a fallen branch, supplies scattered by what appeared to have been a sudden windstorm. The last name on the campsite registration was Patterson, Liam informed Amelia as they watched the ambulance pull away, carrying the small boy to the nearest hospital. A family of 3 from Greenfield, about 60 miles south. They didn't check out yesterday as scheduled, but the rangers hadn't started searching yet. People often stay an extra day. So he wandered away from the campsite during the storm? Amelia asked, trying to piece together the incredible sequence of events. Looks that way. We found small footprints leading away from the tent, Liam confirmed. The search team also found, his voice faltered, they found 2 adult bodies about a quarter mile from the tent. Preliminary assessment suggests they were caught in a flash flood while looking for their son. The stream banks collapsed. Amelia's heart sank. The child, miraculously alive thanks to an extraordinary intervention by a wild animal, had lost both parents. The bitter irony of it wasn't lost on her. "The bear must have found him wandering," she said softly, imagining the terrified child alone in the forest during the storm. Instead of seeing prey, she saw another cub in need. "Is that even possible?" Liam asked, the skepticism in his voice tempered by what he had witnessed with his own eyes. "We tend to underestimate animal cognition," Amelia replied. "Especially maternal instincts. There have been documented cases of interspecies adoption in the wild, lionesses caring for antelope calves, gorillas adopting kittens. But a bear and a human child, that's—" She shook her head, still processing the magnitude of what had happened. "That's extraordinary." The bear and her cub had been tranquilized and transported to the wildlife center, where Marcus and the staff had prepared an isolated enclosure for them. Standard procedure would have called for releasing the bear far from human habitation, but Amelia had insisted on temporary observation first, both for the bear's medical assessment and for scientific documentation of this unprecedented behavior. Now, 3 days later, Amelia stood outside the enclosure watching as the mother bear moved gracefully around the habitat, her cub tumbling playfully behind her. The animal's physical wounds, superficial scrapes likely sustained while carrying. The child had been treated. She showed no signs of aggression toward the staff, though she remained appropriately wary. "How's our miracle worker today?" Marcus asked, joining Amelia at the observation window. "Recovering well," Amelia replied, her gaze following the bear's movements. "She's eating normally, caring for her cub appropriately. You wouldn't know she'd done something that defies everything we think we understand about wild predators." "And the boy?" "Out of danger. Still in the hospital, but the doctors say he'll make a full physical recovery." Amelia paused. "His grandmother is flying in from Seattle tomorrow. She's his only remaining family." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the bears. The scientific part of Amelia's mind was still struggling to reconcile what had happened with her understanding of animal behavior. Black bears were opportunistic omnivores. A hungry mother with a cub to feed, coming across a helpless human child in the wilderness, should have seen an easy meal. Instead, this bear had made a choice that could only be described as compassionate. "The press is having a field day with this story," Marcus noted. "I've had calls from 6 different news outlets. Already this morning, everyone wants to see the hero bear." Amelia nodded, unsurprised. News of the rescue had spread like wildfire, first locally, then nationally. The story of a wild bear saving a human child, protecting him from the elements, and then seeking human assistance when her care wasn't enough. It was irresistible. Already, social media had dubbed the bear Mama Morrigan, after the Celtic goddess associated with both battle and motherhood. "We need to be careful with the publicity," she cautioned. "The last thing we want is people thinking bears are safe to approach. This was an extraordinary case, not typical behavior." "Agreed," Marcus said, "but it does raise fascinating questions about animal cognition and interspecies empathy, doesn't it? I mean, what was going through her mind? What made her see that child as something to protect rather than prey?" It was the question that had kept Amelia awake for the past 3 nights. By any conventional understanding of bear behavior, what the mother had done didn't make sense. And yet, watching her now, the gentle way she guided her cub, the alert intelligence in her eyes, Amelia couldn't help wondering if humans had been underestimating the emotional complexity of wild animals all along. Her phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Hospital called. The boy is awake and asking for his parents. Staff trying to prepare him gently. Thought you should know." Amelia's chest tightened. The miraculous survival would now give way to the devastating reality of loss. The child, whose name they had learned was Ethan, had survived against impossible odds, only to face a different kind of wilderness, life without his parents. "I need to go to the hospital," she told Marcus, already reaching for her keys. "The boy is conscious. Go," Marcus nodded. "I'll handle things here." The drive to Blackridge Memorial took 20 minutes, during which Amelia tried to prepare herself for the encounter. What could she possibly say to a child who had experienced such trauma? What comfort could she offer? At the hospital, she found Liam in the pediatric wing, speaking with a doctor outside one of the rooms. His face brightened slightly when he saw her. "Dr. Harrison," he greeted her, "I was hoping you'd come. This is Dr. Patel, Ethan's attending physician." The doctor, a woman about Amelia's age with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, extended her hand. "Dr. Harrison, I've heard quite a bit about you and your role in this extraordinary case." "How is he?" Amelia asked, peering through the window into the hospital room, where a small figure lay in a bed that seemed far too large for him. "Physically, he's recovering remarkably well," Dr. Patel explained. "The hypothermia actually helped preserve brain function during the period of reduced hydration and nutrition. We're still monitoring for potential complications, but all signs point to a full recovery." "And emotionally?" Liam asked the question that hung heavy in the air. Dr. Patel's expression sobered. "That's more complicated. He's been told his parents can't be with him right now, but we've been waiting for a family member to arrive before addressing the full reality. Child psychologists recommend honesty delivered with compassion, but the timing is delicate." Amelia nodded, understanding the careful balance required. "Has he said anything about what happened, about the bear?" "That's actually why I thought you should be here," Liam interjected. "When he first regained consciousness, he was asking for his parents, as expected. But then he started talking about the big dog that kept him warm and her baby that played with him. The nurses thought it was delirium at first, until they connected it to our report." "He remembers," Amelia whispered, astonished. Given the circumstances and his age, she had assumed the child would have little or no recollection of his time with the bear. "He's been asking to see the big dog again," Dr. Patel added. "When we showed him a picture of a black bear, he became quite excited, said that was his friend who kept the monsters away." The monsters, probably his perception of the darkness, the storm, the terrifying isolation of being lost in the forest. And in the midst of that primal fear, a creature that should have been the most terrifying of all had become his protector. "Would it be all right if I spoke with him?" Amelia asked. Dr. Patel considered this. Briefly. He's still easily fatigued, and we're trying to minimize overstimulation. But given your unique perspective on what happened, it might actually be beneficial. With Liam and Dr. Patel watching through the window, Amelia entered the hospital room quietly. Ethan looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, his dark hair contrasting sharply with the white pillowcase. An IV line delivered fluids to his thin arm, and monitors beeped softly, tracking his vital signs. Despite the ordeal he had endured, his face had the peaceful innocence particular to very young children. His eyes, deep brown and surprisingly alert, turned to her as she approached. "Hello, Ethan," Amelia said gently, sitting in the chair beside his bed. "My name is Amelia. I'm an animal doctor." The boy studied her with solemn curiosity. "You help animals get better?" "That's right." She nodded, encouraged by his coherence. "I help all kinds of animals when they're hurt or sick." Ethan's expression brightened. "Like my friend, the big dog with the baby." Amelia smiled, touched by his description. "Yes, exactly like her. In fact, I'm helping take care of her right now." "Is she okay?" The genuine concern in his voice caught Amelia off guard. After everything this child had been through, his first thought was for the welfare of the bear who had saved him. "She's doing very well," Amelia assured him. "She and her baby are both healthy and safe." Ethan nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then, in the direct way of young children, he asked, "Can I see her again?" The question pierced Amelia's heart. "I'm afraid not, sweetheart. She's a wild animal, and wild animals need to stay in the forest where they belong." His lower lip trembled slightly. "But she's my friend. She kept me warm when it was cold and scary. Her baby played with me." Amelia listened, amazed, as Ethan recounted fragmented memories of his time with the bear, how he had been very lost and crying after running away from the loud crash at their tent, how the big dog had found him and carried me like a puppy to her den, how he had been scared at first, but then realized she wasn't going to hurt him. "She let me sleep next to her baby," he explained earnestly. "And she licked my face when I was crying. Not like a real dog, though. Different." Each detail reinforced the extraordinary nature of what had occurred. Not only had the bear saved the child, but she had actively comforted him, allowed him to bond with her cub, treated him, in essence, as one of her own. "You were very brave," Amelia told him, fighting back tears. "And your friend was very special. Most wild animals wouldn't do what she did." Ethan seemed to consider this. "She knew I needed help," he said simply, with the unwavering certainty of a child. "She's the best friend ever." Amelia spent another 10 minutes with Ethan, letting him talk about his experience, gently steering away from questions about his parents. As Dr. Patel had indicated, he tired quickly, his eyelids growing heavy mid-conversation. "I should let you rest now," Amelia said, noticing his fatigue. "But I wanted to give you something." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving of a bear with a cub, something she had purchased on impulse at the hospital gift shop. "This is to remind you of your friend. She was very brave to help you, just like you were very brave in the forest." Ethan took the carving, with reverent care, his small fingers tracing the wooden shapes. "Thank you," he whispered, already half asleep. As Amelia left the room, she found Liam waiting in the hallway. Dr. Patel had been called away to another patient, but had asked to be updated later. "How much did he remember?" Liam asked as they walked toward the elevator. "More than I expected," Amelia replied, still processing the conversation. "He described being carried by the bear, sleeping next to the cub. He even mentioned the bear licking his face when he cried, probably an instinctive grooming behavior, but he interpreted it as comfort. And he might have been right." Liam shook his head in amazement. "It goes against everything we think we know about wild predators." "Maybe that's the problem," Amelia suggested as they reached the hospital lobby. "Maybe what we think we know isn't the whole story. We classify animals as predators or prey, as operating solely on instinct, as fundamentally different from humans, in their emotional capacity. But what if those are just convenient simplifications that let us distance ourselves from the rest of the natural world?" "You're suggesting this bear consciously chose to save a human child out of what? Compassion? Empathy?" "I don't know," Amelia admitted. "I can't explain it in scientific terms, at least not yet, but I know what I saw in that den. And more importantly, I know what didn't happen. That bear had every opportunity to harm Ethan, and instead she protected him at significant cost to herself, even going to extraordinary lengths to get him human help when she couldn't provide what he needed." They stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight. The media presence around the hospital had finally diminished after the initial frenzy, though a few reporters still lingered near the entrance, hoping for updates on the miracle bear boy. "What happens now?" Liam asked, nodding toward his patrol car. "For the bear, I mean." It was the question that had been occupying much of Amelia's thoughts. Standard wildlife management protocol would suggest relocating the bear and her cub deep into the national forest, far from human interaction. But this wasn't a standard case, and Amelia wasn't convinced that was the right approach. "I've been thinking about that," she said slowly. "What if we took a different approach, not just releasing her back into the wild, but studying her behavior, learning from her? This could be an unprecedented opportunity to understand ursine cognition, interspecies empathy, the complexity of maternal instincts across species boundaries." "You're talking about keeping her at the rehabilitation center?" Liam seemed skeptical. "Not permanently," Amelia clarified, "but long enough to document her behavior, to try to understand what happened. And then, instead of deep relocation, what if we created a monitored release? A protected area where she and her cub could live naturally, but where researchers could continue to observe from a safe distance." Liam considered this. "You'd need approval from Fish and Wildlife, funding, public support." The public support. Part might be the easiest, Amelia noted wryly, gesturing toward a newspaper stand where the bear's story dominated the front page. "As for the rest, I think it's worth fighting for." As they parted ways in the hospital parking lot, Amelia felt a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the past few days had challenged everything she thought she understood about the boundary between human and animal consciousness. That challenge wasn't something to fear. It was an invitation to learn, to grow, to see the natural world with new eyes. The bear, Morrigan, as the public had named her, had given Ethan a second chance at life. In return, perhaps Amelia could give her a legacy beyond just a heartwarming news story. Perhaps this extraordinary animal could help reshape humanity's understanding of the complex emotional lives of the creatures with whom we share this planet. And perhaps in that reshaping, we might find a path to a more compassionate coexistence, one where the line between human and animal wasn't a barrier, but a bridge. 6 months had passed since that extraordinary morning on Route 16. Autumn had transformed Blackridge National Forest into a tapestry of gold and crimson, the trees preparing for winter's approach, just as they had for countless seasons before. But for Amelia Harrison, nothing about the forest would ever seem ordinary again. She stood at the edge of a secluded observation platform, binoculars raised, searching the clearing below for signs of movement. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves and pine. Beside her, a small figure bounced impatiently on his toes, barely tall enough to see over the wooden railing. "Is she coming today?" Ethan Patterson asked, his voice trembling with excitement. "Do you think she remembers me?" Amelia smiled, adjusting the child-sized binoculars hanging around his neck. "We have to be patient, remember? Morrigan comes when she's ready, and yes, I think she remembers you." The boy nodded solemnly, accepting this wisdom as he had accepted so many difficult truths in his young life. At just 4 years old, Ethan had endured more than most adults: the loss of his parents, the trauma of being lost in the wilderness, the struggle to rebuild his life with his grandmother who had relocated from Seattle to be near him. Yet despite everything, he possessed a resilience that continually amazed Amelia. "There," Ethan suddenly whispered, pointing toward the tree line. "I see her." Amelia raised her binoculars, focusing on the spot where the trees gave way to the meadow. Sure enough, a large black bear had emerged from the forest, moving with the deliberate grace that Amelia had come to recognize. Behind her followed a smaller form, her cub, significantly grown since spring, but still clearly juvenile. "It's them," she confirmed softly, feeling the familiar surge of wonder that accompanied each sighting. "Good eye, Ethan." The boy beamed with pride, carefully raising his own binoculars the way Amelia had taught him. This monthly ritual had become an important part of his healing process. These supervised visits to observe from a safe distance the animal that had saved his life. What had begun as an emergency conservation plan had evolved into something far more significant. The Morrigan Project, as it was now officially known, had attracted attention from wildlife biologists across the country. With funding from several major conservation organizations and unprecedented support from state wildlife agencies, Amelia had established a protected study area within Blackridge National Forest, a place where the remarkable mother bear and her cub could live naturally, while researchers observed their behavior from a respectful distance. "She's bigger than last time," Ethan observed, his eyes never leaving the bear's. "That's because she's been eating well, preparing for winter," Amelia explained. "Bears need to gain a lot of weight before hibernation so they can survive the months without food." "Will I still be able to see her in winter?" "Probably not as often," Amelia admitted. "She'll find a den soon and stay there until spring. But that's natural. It's what bears need to do to be healthy." Ethan considered this, his young face serious. "Like how I needed to talk to Dr. Sarah about my bad dreams so I could be healthy inside my heart." Amelia's chest tightened with emotion. Ethan's work with Dr. Sarah Winters, a child psychologist, Specializing in trauma had been essential to his recovery. The nightmares that had once plagued him nightly, dreams of being alone in the dark, of monsters in the forest, had gradually diminished. But the boy's ability to connect his own healing journey with the natural cycles of the forest reflected a wisdom beyond his years. "Exactly like that," she affirmed. "Everyone needs different kinds of care. Bears, people, all living things." And as they watched, Morrigan guided her cub toward the small stream that cut through the meadow. The younger bear bounded playfully ahead, splashing into the water with enthusiastic clumsiness that made Ethan giggle. The sound, bright and uninhibited, was a gift Amelia never took for granted. There had been weeks after his rescue when the boy barely spoke, when the weight of his parents' loss and his own trauma had seemed too heavy for his small shoulders to bear. His gradual return to childlike joy had been hard-won, the result of his grandmother's unwavering love, Dr. Winters's skilled guidance, and, perhaps most surprisingly, his connection to the bear who had saved him. While most children his age developed attachments to imaginary friends or stuffed animals, Ethan had formed a profound bond with a wild predator, a bond that, against all conventional wisdom, seemed to be helping rather than hindering his recovery. "Dr. Amelia," he said suddenly, lowering his binoculars, "do animals get sad when they lose their family too?" The question caught her off guard, as Ethan's insights often did. After a moment's thought, she nodded. "Many animals do show signs of grief, especially the more intelligent ones. Elephants return to the bones of their dead. Wolves howl when a pack member doesn't come home. Primates like chimpanzees sometimes carry their deceased infants for days, unwilling to let go." "What about bears?" "That's one of the things we're studying," Amelia answered honestly. "Bears are generally solitary animals, except for mothers with cubs, but that doesn't mean they don't form attachments or feel loss. We have a lot to learn about their emotional lives." Ethan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. He raised his binoculars again, watching as Morrigan patiently guided her cub in catching fish from the stream. "I think she knew I was sad," he said with the simple certainty of a child. "That's why she helped me, because we both knew what it feels like to be scared and alone." Amelia remained silent, struck by the profound possibility in his words. Was it so inconceivable that a mother bear, driven by instincts more ancient than human comprehension, might recognize the distress of another young creature? That the boundaries between species, which humans had drawn so firmly, might be more permeable than science had been willing to acknowledge? The question had been at the center of her research these past months. While maintaining her position at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, Amelia had also taken on the role of lead researcher for the Morrigan Project, documenting every aspect of the bear's behavior with meticulous scientific rigor. Her preliminary findings, particularly those related to the bear's cognitive abilities and social behaviors, had already challenged several long-held assumptions about ursine psychology. But the most profound impacts of the encounter between bear and boy couldn't be measured with scientific instruments or captured in research papers. They existed in moments like this, in Ethan's growing confidence, in the way his relationship with the natural world was being shaped by his extraordinary experience, in the ripple effects that had transformed an entire community's understanding of their wild neighbors. "Time to head back," came a gentle voice from behind them. Grace Patterson Ethan's grandmother approached the observation platform with careful steps. At 67, she had upended her entire life to care for her orphaned grandson, relocating from the city to this small mountain community where she knew no one. Her courage in facing this unexpected chapter of life was yet another piece of the story that had moved Amelia deeply. "Just 5 more minutes, Grandma," Ethan pleaded, his eyes still fixed on the bears below. Grace smiled, exchanging a knowing look with Amelia. 5 more minutes, she agreed. "Then we need to get back for your appointment with Dr. Sarah." As Grace joined them at the railing, Amelia reflected on how the events of that spring morning had created connections that stretched far beyond just Ethan and the bear. They had pulled together an unlikely community: a wildlife veterinarian, a county deputy, a bereaved grandmother, a child psychologist, and eventually researchers, conservationists, and local residents who had all been touched by the story of an impossible rescue. Liam Chen, the deputy who had accompanied Amelia into the forest that day, had become a vocal advocate for wildlife conservation in the county, helping to bridge the often contentious gap between law enforcement and environmental groups. He regularly visited local schools to share the story of Morrigan and Ethan, teaching children about wildlife safety while also encouraging respect rather than fear for the forest's inhabitants. Dr. Sarah Winters had developed an innovative nature-based therapy program for traumatized children, inspired by Ethan's healing journey. The program, which combined traditional psychological approaches with supervised experiences in natural settings, was showing remarkable results with children who hadn't responded to conventional therapy, and perhaps most surprisingly, the residents of Blackridge County, many of whom had previously viewed wildlife as either a nuisance or a hunting resource, had embraced Morrigan as something of a local legend. Bear-proof trash cans had been voluntarily adopted throughout the region. Reports of bears being killed as nuisances had dropped significantly. Children made pictures of the hero bear that hung in shop windows throughout town. The soft ping of Amelia's phone interrupted her reflections. Checking the screen, she saw a message from Marcus at the Rehabilitation Center. "Journal of Animal Cognition accepted your paper. Congratulations." A warm sense of validation washed over her. The paper, interspecies empathy, documented evidence of rescue behavior by a wild black bear, represented months of careful research, analysis, and peer review. Its acceptance by a prestigious scientific journal meant that Morrigan's story would move beyond local legend and media sensation to become part of the scientific record, challenging researchers around the world to reconsider their understanding of animal consciousness. "Good news?" Grace asked, noticing Amelia's smile. "Very good news," Amelia confirmed, tucking the phone away. She would celebrate properly later. For now, these final few minutes observing Morrigan with Ethan deserved her full attention. Below them, the bear and her cub had finished their fishing lesson and were now moving back toward the forest edge. Just before disappearing into the trees, Morrigan paused. She turned her head, looking up toward the observation platform with that same direct, intentional gaze that had so unsettled Amelia 6 months earlier on Route 16. "She's looking at us," Ethan whispered, awestruck. "She knows we're here." Amelia felt a shiver of recognition pass through her. The bear's awareness, her apparent acknowledgement of their presence, still defied easy explanation. Was it simply the keen senses of a wild predator detecting potential threats? Or was it something more, a form of recognition, of connection across the supposedly insurmountable divide between human and animal consciousness? She had committed herself to exploring that question with rigorous scientific methodology. But, in moments like this, with Morrigan's intelligent gaze seeming to look right through her, Amelia couldn't help feeling that science alone might never capture the full truth of what had happened between this extraordinary animal and the child, whose life she had saved. Morrigan held their gaze for one long moment before finally turning away, disappearing into the forest, with her cub following close behind. "Bye, Morrigan," Ethan called softly, waving his small hand. "See you next time." The sincere friendship, in his voice, without fear, without the artificial barriers adults constructed between themselves and wild creatures, reminded Amelia of why this work mattered so deeply. It wasn't just about understanding one remarkable bear or helping one traumatized child. It was about reimagining the relationship between humans and the natural world, a relationship that had become dangerously disconnected to the detriment of both. As they walked back to the parking area where Liam waited to drive them back to town, Ethan skipped ahead with the resilient energy of childhood, pointing out interesting plants and insects to his grandmother. Grace followed at a more measured pace, her face reflecting the complex mixture of grief and gratitude that had become familiar to Amelia over these months of knowing her. "He's doing so well," Grace observed quietly, watching her grandson examine a particularly fascinating pine cone. There are still hard days, of course, nights when he cries for his parents, but then there are moments like today, when I see him so fully engaged with life, so curious and open-hearted, despite everything he's been through. "He's an extraordinary child," Amelia agreed. "With an extraordinary guardian angel," Grace added, glancing back toward the forest. "I was raised to believe animals are just animals, creatures of instinct without souls or higher feelings. I never questioned it until—" She paused, emotion tightening her voice. "Until an animal I was taught to fear saved the only family I have left." Amelia nodded, understanding completely. Her own scientific training had emphasized the dangers of anthropomorphism, of projecting human emotions and motivations onto animal behavior. Yet her experience with Morrigan had forced her to confront the possibility that in their zeal to avoid anthropomorphism, perhaps scientists had gone too far in the opposite direction, dismissing genuine evidence of complex emotional and cognitive capacities in non-human animals. "The line between human and animal consciousness isn't as clear as we once thought," she said carefully. "We're learning more every day about the rich inner lives of species we previously underestimated. Morrigan's actions challenge us to reconsider those boundaries." "Well, whatever science eventually determines," Grace said with the pragmatism of her generation, "I know what I believe. That bear knew exactly what she was doing when she found my grandson, and I'll be grateful to her until my dying day." When they reached the parking lot, Liam was leaning against his patrol car, not in uniform today, but still carrying himself with the alert posture of a law enforcement officer. He had become a regular participant in these monthly observation visits, his initial skepticism about the project having long since transformed into genuine investment. "Successful bear watch?" he asked as they approached. "We saw her," Ethan announced triumphantly. "She was teaching her baby how to fish, just like my dad taught me at Lake Watson." A shadow of sadness passed briefly over Grace's face at the mention of her son, quickly replaced by a gentle smile. "That's right, honey. And you were quite the fisherman, as I recall." Ethan nodded earnestly. "Dad said I was a natural. Maybe I can teach Morrigan's cub someday." The adults exchanged glances over his head, sharing an unspoken understanding of the impossible nature of his wish. Yet none of them had the heart to dismiss it outright. After all, the very existence of the Morrigan Project was predicated on an event that should have been equally impossible. "Maybe not up close," Liam suggested diplomatically, "but you're already helping Morrigan and her cub by being part of Dr. Harrison's research team. Those observations you made today, they're going to be part of scientific records that help us understand bears better." This redirection satisfied Ethan, who beamed with pride at being considered part of the research team. As he climbed into the back seat of Liam's car, chattering excitedly about everything they had seen, Amelia pulled Grace aside for a moment. "I wanted to let you know that my paper on Morrigan was accepted for publication," she said quietly. "It doesn't mention Ethan by name, just as the child to protect his privacy, but it will bring renewed attention to the story. Are you comfortable with that?" Grace considered this. "Will it help not just Ethan or Morrigan, but the bigger picture?" "I believe it will," Amelia answered honestly. "This case challenges our fundamental assumptions about interspecies relationships. It could influence conservation policies, wildlife management practices, even our broader understanding of animal consciousness." After a moment's thought, Grace nodded decisively. "Then I'm all for it. Ethan's parents were both passionate about environmental causes. It's part of why they loved camping in these forests so much. If their tragedy can somehow contribute to protecting the natural world they cherished, I think they would consider that a fitting memorial." The wisdom in her words touched Amelia deeply. She squeezed the older woman's hand in silent gratitude before they joined Liam and Ethan in the car. As they drove back toward town, Amelia gazed out the window at the forest passing by. Somewhere, among those trees, Morrigan and her cub were going about their lives, unaware of the profound impact they had made on human hearts and minds. Or perhaps, and this was the question that continued to drive Amelia's research, perhaps they were more aware than humans had ever given them credit for. 2 weeks later, Amelia stood before a packed auditorium at Blackridge Community College. The presentation of her published findings had drawn an unexpectedly large crowd. Not just academics and students, but local residents, park rangers, hunters, and families with children. In the front row sat Grace and Ethan, alongside Liam, Marcus, and Dr. Winters, the core group that had been with them throughout this journey. "What happened on Route 16 last spring defies conventional scientific explanation," Amelia began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "A wild black bear, a predator by nature, not only refrained from harming a vulnerable human child, but actively protected him, kept him warm through the night, and then, most extraordinarily, sought human assistance when the child's condition deteriorated." On the screen behind her, carefully curated photographs appeared, the location where Ethan had been found, the makeshift den, Morrigan and her cub in their protected habitat. No images of Ethan himself were included, respecting his privacy and the ongoing sensitivity of his situation. As scientists, we're trained to seek the simplest explanation for observed phenomena. But sometimes, the simplest explanation requires us to expand our understanding rather than constrain it. Amelia continued. The data collected over 6 months of observation suggests that Morrigan, the name given to this remarkable bear by the public, demonstrates cognitive and emotional capacities previously undocumented in ursine species. She proceeded to outline her findings methodically: the bear's problem-solving abilities, her sophisticated social interactions with her cub, her apparent recognition of human observers, and most notably, her consistent lack of aggression toward humans despite her fully wild state. These observations don't prove consciousness as humans experience it, Amelia acknowledged, but they strongly suggest that the boundaries we've drawn between human and animal cognition may be more reflective of our limited measuring tools than actual limitations in animal awareness. As she moved toward her conclusion, Amelia veered slightly from her prepared remarks, drawn by the sight of Ethan's attentive face in the front row. Beyond the scientific implications, this case invites us to reconsider our relationship with the natural world more broadly, she said, her voice softening. For too long, humans have positioned themselves as separate from and superior to nature, as observers and controllers rather than participants in a shared ecosystem. The story of a bear who recognized a child in need reminds us that the connections between species run deeper than we've been willing to acknowledge. She paused, looking out at the diverse audience. Whether you approach this story through science, spirituality, or simply human compassion, its message remains powerful. The divide we've created between ourselves and the natural world is largely of our own making, and perhaps in bridging that divide, we might discover not just new scientific understanding, but a more harmonious way of existing within the web of life that sustains us all. The applause that followed was enthusiastic, but it was the discussion afterwards that truly moved Amelia. Community members shared their own stories of meaningful encounters with wildlife. A local hunter spoke eloquently about how the Morrigan story had transformed his approach to the forest, teaching him to view animals as individuals rather than abstract resources. Parents described how their children had developed new interests in conservation because of Ethan and his bear. As the event wound down, Amelia found herself surrounded by well-wishers and questioners. Through the crowd, she spotted Ethan standing with his grandmother near the display of wildlife photography that had been set up in the lobby. The boy was intently explaining something to an elderly couple, gesturing with the animated confidence of a child who knows he has an important story to tell. Marcus appeared at her side, following her gaze. "Quite the ambassador we've got there," he commented with a smile. "Hard to believe that's the same withdrawn child from 6 months ago." "He's found his purpose," Amelia replied softly. "Just like I think I've found mine." The Morrigan Project had evolved from an emergency response into her life's work, not just studying one remarkable bear, but using that story as a window into the broader question of animal consciousness and human-wildlife relationships. The grant funding secured for the project would sustain research for at least 5 years, with potential for renewal if the findings continued to prove valuable. "The university position they offered you, have you decided?" Marcus asked, referencing the prestigious research chair Amelia had been invited to consider at a major state university. She shook her head. "I'm staying here. This is where the work is, not just with Morrigan, but with this community, with Ethan, We're building something important in Blackridge, something that wouldn't translate to an academic setting." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "I figured as much. Just wanted to make sure you weren't turning it down out of loyalty to the center. We'll manage if you need to move on." "I'm not going anywhere," Amelia assured him, "though I might need some flexibility when the book deadline approaches." The book deal had been unexpected, a major publisher reaching out after the initial media coverage of her journal article. Normally, Amelia would have hesitated to translate complex scientific concepts for a general audience, but the Morrigan story had changed her perspective on that as well. Some truths needed to reach beyond academic circles to create meaningful change. As the crowd thinned, Ethan broke away from his conversation and ran to Amelia, his eyes bright with excitement. "Dr. Amelia, I told those people all about Morrigan and her cub. They said they're going to put special locks on their trash cans so bears don't get hurt eating garbage." Amelia knelt to his level, marveling at how this child had become perhaps the most effective conservation advocate in the county. "That's wonderful, Ethan. You're making a real difference." He nodded solemnly. "Grandma says that when bad things happen, we can use them to help make good things happen later. Like how Morrigan saved me, and now we're helping save her and other bears too." The wisdom in his young voice caught Amelia by surprise, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. This, perhaps, was the greatest lesson from the extraordinary events that had unfolded since that spring morning on Route 16. Not just the scientific revelations about animal cognition, but the profound ripple effects of connection across supposedly impermeable boundaries, between human and animal, between tragedy and hope, between loss and renewal. As Ethan took her hand and led her toward the exit where Grace and Liam waited, Amelia felt a deep certainty that the most important discoveries still lay ahead. Out in the forest, a bear with unprecedented abilities continued to raise her cub, unaware that she had changed human hearts and minds through a single act of cross-species compassion. Or perhaps, and this was the question that would drive Amelia forward, perhaps she was aware, in ways humans were only beginning to understand. Either way, the road that had once been blocked by a desperate mother bear had opened into a new path, one that might lead humanity toward a more humble, connected relationship with the creatures who share our world. And for Amelia Harrison, following that path had become not just a scientific pursuit, but a calling that would shape the rest of her life. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.